There have been many times that I've encountered revisionists who will make the claim that Maoists apparently just don't understand or deliberately choose to ignore the material conditions faced by various quote unquote AES countries. Apparently, none of us realized that the USSR was illegally dissolved, and this created a crisis in the world communist movement, which led to economic devastation in countries like Cuba, Laos, Vietnam, and the DPRK. Obviously, Maoists understand that the period of the late 1980s and 1990s was especially difficult on socialist countries all around the world. And when the USSR dissolved in 91, this led to the collapse and balkanization of the Eastern Bloc, and most socialist governments around the world couldn't take it. Cuba, the DPRK, and other countries face severe economic sanctions and isolation, which put these countries in a stranglehold that they're still in to this day. We don't conveniently ignore these dire circumstances because we hate these countries for abandoning some sort of pure and idealized view of socialism. Neither do we claim that the current revisionism of these countries occurs only from internal dynamics. Maoists are conscious of the effect that the dissolution of the Soviet Union had on the socialist world, and how the emergence of neoliberalism has led to extreme difficulty for these countries. Similarly, the geopolitics of the Cold War were extremely complex, and contrary to the Western assumption that the communist movement was monolithic, you had factions emerging as a consequence of the Sino-soviet split, with examples being the pro-Beijing camp, the pro-Moscow camp, and the non-aligned movement. We also realize that these complicated circumstances created an opportunity for the capitalist roaders within ruling socialist parties to push for policies which roll back socialism and reverse the socialist trajectory. The assumption that Maoists disregard the material conditions of society ignores the fact that Maoists have developed a highly sophisticated understanding of the role that material conditions play in society, with concepts like new democracy, class struggle continuing under socialism, bureaucrat-comprador capitalism, and many more. Each of these concepts, as well as numerous others I didn't list, deals with the specific material conditions faced by countries emerging out of systems of neo-colonialism, or countries attempting to construct and pursue a socialist project. In terms of new democracy, Maoists understand that in stages of underdevelopment, there may arise a need for a limited and temporary strategic adoption of capitalist elements. There are a multitude of differences, however, in the Maoist concept of new democracy and the adoption of market socialism, which we'll explain in a future episode. There's also an entirely different set of circumstances which led to China's adoption of market socialism as opposed to Vietnam, Laos, Cuba, and the DPRK's adoption of market socialism. And there are varying degrees of this adoption within each country. And Maoists would be remiss if we ignored these differences as well. I plan on making an entire video dedicated to Chinese revisionism, but the basic summary is that after the defeat of the revolutionary faction of the CPC in the late 1970s, the weak line of the two whatevers, promoted by Mao's successor, Hua Guofeng, failed to counter the resurgence of the bourgeois headquarters in the party. This led to the ascension of Deng Xiaoping and his open-door policy in 1978. This began a series of widespread reforms which dismantled the commune system and the iron rice bowl welfare system in China, and oversaw the privatization of large portions of the economy. Over time, the economic system in China shifted from one with a socialist mode of production to the bureaucratic state capitalist mode of production we have today. Contrary to the arguments presented by Deng and his revisionist cohorts, the reforms were not a result of inefficiency or a stagnation of growth in the communes. As I'll discuss in my future video about China, there was consistent and widespread growth in the communes, which continued up until the very end of their existence, when they were unceremoniously snuffed out by Deng and the bourgeois headquarters. The reforms were never about building the productive forces. They were always about removing the proletariat from state power in favor of China's national bourgeoisie, and joining with the West in the global neoliberal project. You see, the Maoists have a very thorough analysis of the material conditions of all of these quote-unquote AES countries, and it's because of these analyses and the conditions which have manifested in China and other AES countries that we regard market socialist reforms as a threat to socialism and a revisionist adoption of neoliberalism. The revisionists commit the error of economism, which is when politics in command of the working class takes a back seat to the development of the productive forces. Economism becomes a means by which the revisionists seek to displace the dictatorship of the proletariat and reroute the socialist trajectory to capitalist restoration under the guise of pragmatism. We'll discuss more about this supposed pragmatism in the next episode. But another important thing to note here is that when the revisionists claim that Maoists disregard the material circumstances, it's often in furtherance of the claim that Maoists are dogmatic purity fetishists. These two arguments, that Maoists are dogmatic purity fetishists and that Maoists ignore material reality, are both displaying a key aspect of modern revisionism. Number one, that revisionists will brand anti-revisionism as dogmatism, and number two, that revisionists will hide their revisionism behind the guise of pragmatism. So that about does it for this episode. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the next episode of the Maoist anti-revisionist series, we will discuss the supposed pragmatism of market socialism. So stay tuned for that. That about does it. Danky Kang out.